Hi, I'm Valerie Engelhardt, and in this video I want to show you how I paint some ballet slippers using Kuretake Shadow Black paint. I've already sketched my ballet slippers on some Canson XL watercolor paper. This paper is fairly inexpensive and it's a mix of like cotton and cellulose, so it behaves very differently than my usual Arches watercolor paper. I'm using a Princeton Neptune round size 10 and obviously the palette Kuretake Shadow Black. The first thing I did was dip into the pink color and I put it on a piece of paper on the side because when you take the paint out of the well, it is very strong. It's a very dark value, and so in order to see how light it is or how to also get it light on my brush, I want to test it first, and that's what my scrap piece of paper is for. Right now I am just painting wet into wet because I want some soft fusions between my shadows. I dry off my brush and I start lifting paint off the paper. This is because I want to put some shine on the ballerina slipper. It is made of silk and is therefore shiny in the light. Alright, now I'm putting in the second ballet slipper in the back. Now, my first ballet slipper is still a little wet, so there could be some bleeding that happens, but this is just a first layer, and honestly, this painting is just me playing around, having fun. Like, for my serious paintings, use different paper, different paints, and I don't sketch beforehand, so this was just me experimenting and enjoying myself, trying something new. And here I go again, wet into wet, placing in some shadows, and essentially I'm going to do the exact same thing as I did with the slipper in the foreground, is put in my shadows, and then I will dry my brush and lift off the paint. Don't be afraid to go dark with watercolor because it dries much paler than when it goes down. Just going to lightly paint in the straps using that same pink color. I'm going to start blocking in my skirt. I'm going for the green color, and of course I want a very light value based on my reference image. The ballet slippers are the star of the show and are pink, but the skirt is the next most important element, and so I wanted it to be a complementary color, and green is the complementary color to red and pink. And this skirt is silk too, so I'm going to paint it very much the same way. Go wet into wet, and then dry off my brush, and use that dry brush to lift off paint to create some soft highlights. This side of the skirt is darker, so I'm going to go in with a darker value of paint. As you can see, the paper is beginning to buckle, my paper is not taped down because I want the ability to move it around if I want to. But that does mean that with all of that water at the top, the paper is beginning to bend. But since this is just a study, just me having fun, I don't really care too much. For the skin, I decided to go for the yellow-black color, and I'm painting it fairly pale. And as you can see, I'm painting over the straps for a couple reasons. One is to give a little more harmony to that area, as if the straps are a little more sheer, because I will be painting over that later, but then it also keeps the paint on the legs harmonious. Instead of trying to paint in between all of those little triangles, I can just put in one wash and then paint more pink over it later. I'm just going to darken some portions to add shadow and give the feet and leg form. All right, I'm adding some additional shadow to the legs because in my reference photo, the shadows are very dark. And usually when it comes to painting, you really need to pay attention to your values. Based on the shapes involved, we can tell these are ballet slippers. This is a person's legs. So the color doesn't matter as much as getting the shapes and the value of those shapes correct. Now I'm just lifting off the areas where I'm going to paint those straps back on. Right, I've decided to start painting in the floor, and I'm using the brownish black. And what I'm going to do is just paint a very wet, dark wash and block that in. Right now I've grabbed a bit of the purple and I'm creating shadows, trying to darken the floor where the feet touch. And that floor is shiny and is going to reflect the shine from the ballet slipper. So the best way to create that shine is to tilt my paper up at an angle and add some water and let that water flow downward and take some of the paint with it. Right, now that it's dried, I went back up into the skirt and forgot to press record. But all I did was add some darker values to what would be the back part of the skirt. So this part of the skirt is not seeing a lot of light. And at this stage, I'm just painting in the creases, trying to show that there are folds to the skirt to give it movement because this ballerina is dancing. I've picked up my pink again and I am going back in and painting those straps back on. And now you can't really see my reference image, but in the reference, the straps are actually a lighter value than the legs. However, this is where I pulled out my handy dandy artistic license and decided that I didn't want to make the legs look like a dark blackish yellow. So in order to make the straps stand out and be separate from the legs, I made it more of a mid-tone. And no one ever has to know. The painting just has to make sense. I finally have picked up a finer brush. This is a Mimic size 4 round brush. And that's because I want to get in some much finer lines to define the edges of these straps. If I did it with my size 10 round, I'd probably end up flooding the paper and creating some marks that I don't really want right now. And so that's why I went for the smaller brush. Deepening the shadow of the foot that is behind the front foot. Right, back to the size 10, we are going to put in the wall behind the ballerina, and I picked the blue-black, and I think this color is just gorgeous. But all I'm going to do is just fill in the space for now. And at this point, I'm noticing that the skirt needs to be a darker value, as well as that part of the wall. And I'm adding some of that green as a way of connecting colors and connecting shapes so that my painting doesn't look so rigid, so almost paint by numbers. Wherever it makes sense to do so, lose some edges, pull some colors from one area to another, especially if they're of the same value. All right, now to make the background more interesting, in the reference image there is molding on the wall, and I liked how that added extra horizontal elements to break up the strong vertical legs that we see. So I'm just lifting up the paint so that I do get those horizontal lines, but that they're more subtle. And I'll put this reference image, a link to it, in the description. That way, if you want to follow along or just paint your own version, it's a pretty simple silhouette to paint, and I highly recommend it. It's pretty easy, relaxing, and it's pretty classic. All right, I'm realizing that this side of the skirt just is not dark enough, so I'm sort of glazing another layer of that dark green. And really all that's left for this painting is to go in and just correct values. Usually at this stage it's adding more darks. But there it is, it's done. If you give it a try, let me know, and thank you for watching.